All right, good morning, students. Welcome to Zoology Lesson 3. This is the beginning of the invertebrate unit, and over the next 10 or so lessons, we're going to be studying invertebrates and then vertebrates. And so at the beginning of the lesson, we always start with an attention activity. Let's get right into it. As I move these little animals, this might be a little elementary for you, but I want you to think about why I'm putting them on one side or the other of this T-chart. And just think of your reasons. I'm going to move the jellyfish over here to the right side, and the koala bear to the left, and the spider goes to the right. Elephant, lion stays on the left, and the bumblebee on the right, and the worm on the right, and the fish on the left. And you might be thinking at this point, up to this point, you might have thought, well, the ones that are small are on the right and the ones that are large are on the left. And you would have been right, but now we have a little teeny goldfish on the left there. So that kind of disrupts that idea. Mosquito, where do you think? It goes to the right, and the dog to the left. So what is the difference between these two kinds of animals? On the left, you have the vertebrates, and on the right, you have the invertebrates. And that really is what the lesson is about today, is a study of the difference between vertebrates and invertebrates. And then we're going to go in depth a little bit more later in this lesson about invertebrates specifically and how they're categorized from one category to the next. If you got that right on the attention activity, well done. Pat yourself on the back. Very proud of you. The research section today is on specifically invertebrates, and it will be for the next few lessons. We have a unit, I think it's about 5 lessons, where we're studying invertebrates, where there are a lot of invertebrates. But before we get into that, let's just make sure we understand what the definition and what the difference is between a vertebrate, the most significant difference between a vertebrate and an invertebrate. So what does vertebrate mean? If you want to pause the video, you can go look online in the Noah Webster 1828 dictionary, or you can look it up in your green Noah Webster 1828 dictionary. If you've got one of those, great. Go ahead and pause the video and look that up. Otherwise, we're just going to give you the definition and move on. The definition of vertebrate is having a backbone or vertebral column containing the spinal marrow as an animal. And so what do you think invertebrate means? So if vertebrate means having a backbone, what do you think invertebrate means? And the important part of the word to look there, and you can look it up, and you can see the definition means in the beginning you're going to look for the word invertebrated. And so look up the word invertebrated, see what it says, but you can probably guess it. If you put in in front of some words, or I am in front of some words, you think of the word possible. Possible means you can do something. Impossible means you can't do something. So vertebrated, indiscrete, and discrete, the opposite of, right? So if vertebrated means that it's an animal with a backbone, then obviously invertebrated would mean that it's an animal without a backbone. Destitute of a backbone or vertebral chain. Destitute is a word that means not having or possessing, if you're unfamiliar with that word. Invertebrate animals do not have a backbone. They are animals without a backbone. Spiders, mosquitoes, worms, bees, jellyfish. There are several. What do you think humans are? This is an easy one for you. Of course, we are vertebrates. If you're questioning that, just reach around to your middle of your back and with the ends of your fingers, just press your fingers against that bone, that bumpy bone. It runs up the middle all the way down to your waist, all the way up as high as you can, and then you'll know you have a spinal column or a backbone. There it is. Yes, we are vertebrates. Now, there are a couple flashcards in this lesson. The first one is that there are far more invertebrate animals in the world than vertebrates. That's an important point to understand, that there are a lot more. Do you know how many more there are? Ants are just one kind of invertebrate animal. Fun fact, how many more invertebrates are there than vertebrates? Well, for every vertebrate animal, like this little cute dog here, you have a mosquito, a spider, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 invertebrates. There are actually over nine times as many invertebrate animals as vertebrates in the world. closer to 95% in fact. The other important point that we've already talked about is that invertebrate animals do not have a backbone. So those 2 points, there are a lot more invertebrates, and invertebrate animals don't have a backbone. Now we've talked about the most unique differentiating characteristics that that invertebrates have when you compare them to vertebrates. We're going to move on now to how you classify invertebrates. There's so many of them, millions and millions of invertebrate animals out there. You have to start classifying them based on common characteristics. And they've grouped these into subcategories called phylums. And next we're going to study the most common subphylums, or phylums I should say. And the first one is a porifera. We're not going to talk about what that is right now. The next category or phylum is the Cnidarian, and then the Echinoderm, and the Mollusca, and worms. You should be pretty familiar with that group, worms, and arthropods. Now, the very first one we're going to study is the porifera, but when Carl Linnaeus first created his method for organizing animals, he had just 2 phyla of invertebrates, the insecta, or insects, and the vermes, worms. And since that time, scientists have found that there are so many more common characteristics that they could further classify them into other groups, that they've come up with these 6 really common ones, the ones that you just saw there. And the first one that we're going to look at is the porifera. The main member of the porifera phylum is the sponge. There are several thousand kinds of sponges. Sponges are very simple animals. They have no brain, internal organs, blood, eyes, or ears. They have no nervous system. They don't have a digestive system or a circulatory system. Sponges rely on having water constantly flow through their bodies to obtain food and oxygen, and to remove waste from their bodies. They attach themselves to the bottom of the ocean or the sides of the underwater mountains. Water is continually passing over them and through them, going through their pores, little tiny pores that they have, all throughout their bodies, if you will, and make it possible for them to filter food particles from the water that they use for their food. Sponges are nature's natural water filter. Now we're going to watch a really cool video that shows exactly how a sponge works.
Sponges are very effective filter feeders since they're able to capture and eat particles as small as bacteria as well as larger particles. They might not look like they're doing much, but a simple demonstration shows how effectively sponges can pump water. On a reef in the Caribbean, I make a dive with a syringe filled with a non-toxic dye called fluorescein. By squirting it around the base of some sponges, we can observe how the water is moving by watching what the dye does. Within only seconds, the dye is pumped through the sponges along with the water. As you can see, a sponge is a pretty good water pump and also a good strainer. Any plankton that goes in with the water won't come back out through the osculum. Tube sponges are even more spectacular to observe. They pump the dye so furiously that they look like a collection of miniature smokestacks. The ultimate test is a hefty barrel sponge. What will a big monster like this do? It takes a few seconds for the dye to work its way through the sponge. Wait for it. But then it pours out like smoke from a chimney. That's pretty good pumping from those tiny little collar cells.
What a great video, huh? I loved seeing how the dye would move up through each of those columns. And it was different for each of the sponges based on their size, but you could see easily how water passes through them and up into them and up out the top, just like a chimney. Let's do a quick review on porifera before we move on to the next phylum. Which of the following animals are in the porifera group? Jellyfish, starfish, snails, sponges. That should be an easy one. Yep, you're right, sponges. How do sponges get the food they need to survive? And just keep track of how many you get right and how many you miss. How do sponges get the food they need to survive? Their mouths, their skin, their pores, or their bodies? You got it, pores. What kinds of food do sponges receive through their tiny pores? Small particles, small fish, bacteria, and algae. Both bacteria and small particles. A little bit of a trick question there. There are approximately 100 different kinds of sponges in the ocean. True or false? That actually is false, and you might have said true because there are 100 different kinds of sponges, but they're not approximately 100 kinds of sponges. There are thousands and thousands of different kinds of sponges in the ocean. So if it didn't have the word approximately, that would have been a true answer. All right, moving on. The Cnidarian phylum. This is pronounced Cnidarians, and the initial C is silent. That phylum has two groups. The first group inside of Cnidarian contains all the anemones and corals, classified as Anthozoa. This name, Anthozoa, comes from the Greek word anthos, which means flower, and zoa, which means animals. Hence, Anthozoa, directly translated, is flower animals. This name fits them perfectly since they have a flower-like appearance. If you look at the picture here, you can see these flowery-looking, very colorful anemones. Pretty cool, huh? I love these. If you've ever been snorkeling, you've seen some of these in the Caribbean, perhaps. And not too many places where you can see these off the coast, any coastlines of the U.S. You got to get a little further south. The second group are the jellyfish. And jellyfish, you'll know them well if you've swam into a jellyfish. I have once, and I got stung by a jellyfish, and it was not a good experience. We'll talk a little bit about that now. The Cnidarian group contains over 10,000 species of animals. Their bodies are made up of non-living, jelly-like substance. They have muscles, nervous systems, and some have sensory organs, unlike porifera. The Cnidarians are distinguished from all other animals by having special cells containing toxins that fire like harpoons or little arrows and are used mainly to capture prey. That's why you can get quite a sting from a jellyfish. The stingers on a jellyfish hang down, as you can see in the picture on the right, and the stingers on the anemones, they stick up. But they perform the same function, and you can get stung by either one of them. Cnidarian basic facts continued. Most cnidarians prey on organisms ranging in size from microscopic organisms called plankton to animals several times larger than themselves. Many feed on algae and parasites. These animals have to watch out because there are other animals that like to eat them. Starfish, sea slugs, fish, and turtles like to eat coral, anemones, and jellyfish. We're going to watch a video next that basically is the turtle versus the jellyfish. Alright, you probably guessed that the sea turtle, would win that battle. But that's another fun video to just show how animals are, they have defense mechanisms, but they also are prey, and they're preyed upon. And that's the cycle of life and the blessing that they are to us and to other animals. And we'll talk about that a little bit later too. Let's do a little Cnidarian review. What animals are members of the Cnidarians phylum? Jellyfish, coral, snails, anemones. If you picked all of those except for snails, you're right. Which of the following makes Cnidarian different from porifera? Muscles, toxins, eyes, stingers. Which of those do the Cnidarians have that porifera don't have? Muscles, toxins, and stingers. If you guessed all of those except for, I can't remember what I had there. How are Cnidarian animals helpful to the world? Beauty, food, protection. It's all of those. Beauty, food, and protection. Protection for small fish, food for some animals, and then they're just really pretty. And that is a great purpose too. Sometimes that is the purpose of an animal, just to beautify the world. Cnidarian animals feed on animals several times their size. Is that true or false? What do you think? It's true. They do. Okay, next one is the Echinoderm phylum. This third group of invertebrates is the Echinoderm, pronounced Echinoderm. The word Echinoderm means spiny-skinned. Many Echinoderm, this is a tough word to say because there's an A in there that you don't see in the word after the O, Echinoderm. Echinoderm. Many echinoderms are covered with spines, and you can see on the left side you have a starfish, and on the right side we have a sand dollar. One is covered with spines and the other is not, so it's not always the case, but there are teeny tiny spines on a sand dollar as well. Just can't really see them, because they're not so pronounced like you see on a starfish or some of the other echinoderms. Most adults are easy to recognize because of their 5-point radial symmetry too, which means that many echinoderms look the same on both sides when cut in half. So imagine cutting the sand dollar that you see in the bottom right. Imagine cutting that vertically right straight down through the middle, through the top petal, if you will, of that sand dollar. And if you would compare those two, they'd be exactly the same. Same thing for the starfish. So it's a very common characteristic of echinoderms, the symmetry. And then also the 5 points that they have. You can see there's 5 points on the petal, and there's 5 points on the starfish. Oh, it looks like I got ahead of myself there. So echinoderms are often recognized because they have appendages or patterns in their bodies in multiples of 5. Echinoderms are a little more sophisticated than cnidarians, as they do have a digestive system as well. So remember that. They also have a digestive system, in addition to muscles and a nervous system like the cnidarian did, that the porifera don't. Many have a skeleton on the inside of their bodies, but no backbone. Of course, they don't have a backbone because they are that's right, they're an invertebrate. We wouldn't be studying them if they had a backbone here. One of the most notable characteristics of echinoderms is their ability to regenerate tissue. Now, this is kind of their superpower. Organs and limbs. For example, if a starfish loses a leg, it can grow a new one. In some cases, they can completely regenerate. An entire starfish, for example, can completely regenerate from a single limb that's existing. It does make you wonder if one leg falls off, if it could regenerate from that one leg and you end up with 2 starfish. I don't know, but I would assume yes, if that's the case. I don't know the answer. That's something you could do as your enrichment at the end of this lesson. You could look up the answer to that question. Can a starfish be cut in half and grow 2 starfish, or does one of the sides die? These colorful, now these are still, we're still in the echinoderm section, and this is a totally different kind that you don't see the 5 points, but you do see the symmetry here. You cut that in half and it would look the same on both sides. So those characteristics don't follow with every single species within a phylum. These colorful animals have a defense mechanism to help protect them from predators. Some have spines, and others possess toxins in their bodies that hurt a predator when they bite them, or that can be sent out through their tube-like feet. Crabs, sharks, otters, and seabirds like to eat echinoderms, In addition to being food for larger animals, they also provide habitats for parasites, including crabs and worms and snails. So they also provide shelter for some animals like the Cnidarians did, and that the Porifera did as well. Echinoderms also help build land. Their bone-like skeletons are major contributors to many limestone formations throughout the world. I think we're looking at a sea urchin here, I believe. I'm not totally sure, but I'm pretty sure that's what that is, a sea urchin. Echinoderm review. What number is common among most echinoderm? You know that. 4, 5, 6, 2. Of course, it's 5. How are echinoderms helpful? For food? For homes? For beauty? For limestone? I think I know the answer here, and I believe it's all of them, and it is. How do echinoderms protect themselves from predators? Is it their camouflage, their spines, their toxins, or their speed? I believe it's spines and toxins. Yes, it is. What is another name for echinoderm? 5 points, symmetry, or spiny skinned? Spiny skinned, yes. All right, let's move on to the next group. Let's look at these right here. The snails and slugs and clams and oysters, octopus, and squid are all part of the next group of invertebrates we will look at. What is similar about their bodies? So look at the bodies. Don't look at what's around their bodies. Just look at their bodies specifically. And what do you notice that's unique, or that's not unique? Not unique to them necessarily, but the same within this phylum. These are called mollusca. This is the mollusca phylum, commonly known as mollusks, are a group of invertebrates that have soft bodies. That is the unique defining characteristic of a mollusk, is their soft bodies. There are a variety of members of the mollusca phylum, some with hard shells that have protection, like the one on the top in this picture right here. You can see the shell that wraps around the body. And then others that don't, like the squid on the bottom. You see it doesn't have any hard shell around it, but it's much larger. Mollusks have more highly developed body systems than the other invertebrates that we've studied so far. We have looked, in fact, the squid and octopus have very sophisticated nervous systems. Oh, you know what? I think I just said that was a squid when in fact it is an octopus. So my apologies there. I need to brush up on my invertebrates a little bit better. All right, so besides being very smart, the giant squid and the colossal squid are also the largest animals of the entire invertebrate phyla. So these are massive, and you can see a little picture here that represents one of these colossal squids. But if an adult human, was next to it, that's how that would look. A colossal squid was discovered that was 10 meters or 33 feet long and weighed 500 kilograms. That's over 1,000 pounds. This picture gives you an idea of how large that squid would look. Right next to a scuba diver, that is. All right, moving on. Have you been to the beach? Yes, you probably have been to the beach, and you have probably found the remains of many, many mollusks. All of these shells are the hard coverings that cover those soft bodies. Mollusks has been an important food source for humans for hundreds of years, and other animals eat them as well. Additional uses of mollusks by humans include using the shells to trade as a form of currency, harvesting pearls from oysters and mussels, and even the production of a special dye called Tyrian or Tyrian purple. I don't know how you say that word, the Tyrian purple probably, used to dye royal robes back before the time of Christ. That's pretty neat to think, huh? Let's do a mollusk review. Where do most mollusks live? You know this, in the water, right? Of course. Which of the following is a mollusk? Worms, jellyfish, squid, snails. Snails is it. Oh, and squid. I missed one there. Moving too fast. How are mollusks beneficial to humans? Food, shells, pearls, dye. All of them, right? They provide food for us. Snails, although I've never eaten them, some people do. And there are many others, right? Shells and pearls and dye. All mollusks have soft bodies that are protected by shells. Is that true or is that false? Now the word all would probably tend to push me to the answer false, because usually these characteristics that these phylums have are not always the case, but commonly the case. And the answer is false. That's right. All right, we're moving on to the fifth phylum. We're nearly done with our research of invertebrate subphylum, or phylums, I should say. They're not subphylums. There are subphylums within phylums, but we're just studying the main phylums, the 6 most common phylums today. And we're on the fifth one, worms. This is probably the one that you're the most familiar with because you see these all the time, right? Where do most invertebrates we've looked at so far live? And the answer to that, of course, is in the water. There are 2 more main classes of invertebrates, and these groups have some members that live in the water and many that live on the land. So we're going to move kind of to land now with these last 2 phylums. Worms is the first one, and the second one is arthropods. Worms are the 5th class, and they are the 5th phylum of invertebrates that we're going to talk about. Worms have long tube-like bodies that you can see here on the left. You've seen this worm. This is an earthworm, and this is very, very common, right? You see these whenever you dig in the dirt. If it's wet especially, you're going to find some of these earthworms. And I love earthworms. I'm going to tell you why in a little bit. Worms have long tube-like bodies and no legs. They can be microscopic, very small. You can't even see them. They can also be as long as a meter. That's 3 feet long. Have you ever seen a worm that's 3 feet long? I have not. If I saw a worm that was 3 feet long, I'd probably think that I was seeing a snake. They live in a variety of places. They live in the ocean. They live in fresh water. They live on land. They live on plants. Probably seen a worm on a plant at some point eating some leaves that even potentially turns into a beautiful butterfly. And even in animals, I would say, and even in humans. Of course, humans are an animal in that sense. And so worms can live inside of us too, and they're generally not good to have in our digestive system. But sometimes you can eat them, and or drink them in many cases too, because they're so small you don't see them, and they can attach themselves to the inside of our bodies and cause a lot of problems with our digestive system. Consider a few places where you've seen worms. Where have you seen worms? We've talked about a few of them here already. All right, this arthropod phylum, the last of this is, these are the largest group. This is the last or the 6th group or 6th phylum that we're going to talk about today. And this is the largest group of invertebrates. In fact, there are over 1 million different unique animals in this phylum. Can you believe? You can see a few of them here, but many of the insects that you see, a lot of sea animals like this crab that you see, or this lobster that you see here in this picture, and scorpions in the middle. Arachnids, spiders and scorpions, there's insects, there's crustaceans, all are part of this phylum. Okay? The main characteristic of this phylum is that they generally have an exoskeleton. That is a skeleton on the outside of their bodies. They have jointed legs and segmented bodies. Have you ever seen a crab? Crabs have a hard shell on the outside. You see these oysters over here, these clams, I should say, and they also have a hard outside, right? This exoskeleton protects the soft insides of their bodies. And this was a lot like the mollusks, if you remember. A lot of the mollusks had soft bodies, and they had the protection of a shell on the outside. So in this sense, they're very similar. Think of an insect that has a hard covering on the outside of their bodies. Let's think for a minute. What comes to mind when you think of an insect that you see running around all the time outside on sidewalks and on leaves and up your leg, and sometimes they're black and sometimes they're red and sometimes they can bite. I gave you a lot of hints there and you probably got it, but the ant is one that comes first to mind for me when I think of exoskeletons and insects. Look closely at the legs of this ant. Can you see how they have several places where they bend? They have 6 of these legs. They have 6 jointed legs, in fact. And what do you notice about the shape and features of its body? All arthropods have 3 segments that include their head, and you can see some eyes on that. You can see a mouth on it, perhaps. You can see ears on this end, and you can see a thorax. And we have a thorax, which is kind of our chest cavity, if you will. And then the abdomen. You know what our abdomen is? It's between our hips and our thorax, or our chest, right? How are the bodies of arthropods the same as your body? So I bet you've never thought about all the similarities between you and a tarantula or a massive spider like we see here. But there are many. Like I said, they have eyes, they have ears, they have legs, they have arms, they have a head, they have a thorax, and we do too. We have an abdomen, right? We have a digestive system, so do they. Reproductive organs require oxygen and food to survive. They have muscles, so do we. They have a brain, so do we. They have a nervous system, so they feel pain like we do. Fun fact, 60% of the DNA code of a fruit fly and humans is identical. So the next time you see a fly, just think that fly is 60% the same as you when it comes to their DNA code. It's kind of crazy to think, huh? All right, be on the lookout this week for invertebrates. You should see quite a few. Whenever you see an insect, a caterpillar, a mosquito, a cricket, snails, and ladybugs, and honeybees flying around, you'll know that you're seeing an invertebrate. They're, like I said, remember at the beginning of this, they outnumber us, vertebrates, 9-1. So there are a lot more of them than there are vertebrates. Now, all of God's creations have a purpose, and I think this is really important that you understand this concept here, that the earth was created to give us a place to live and learn. You think about the sun, and it was created to give us light, and it was created to give us warmth and energy, and that energy and that light and that warmth allows plants to grow. Because of the plants that we have food to eat, and we have a home to live in. You think about where trees are a plant, right? That's where we get the wood that we build our houses with. And because of the leaves of these plants, we have air to breathe, right? Plants are also something that allows animals to survive. And many animals provide food for us and other animals to survive. And so these all things are connected, and they all have a purpose. Let's watch a little video about the honeybee now. Honeybees are incredible animals. I love this video.
Okay, time to head to work. But before this honeybee starts her commute, she's prepping her tools. Because honeybees collect pollen. You knew that. But it's not as simple as you might think. Plants want the bees to carry the pollen away and spread it to other flowers. That's pollination, how plants reproduce. But bees also need to carry lots of it home. Pollen is a protein-packed food for the hive. Luckily, they have the right gear. They're hairy, like tiny flying teddy bears. She's covered in 3 million hairs for trapping pollen. They're even on her eyes. Here on her legs, they're shaped into spiky brushes and flat combs. When she lands on a bloom, she really gets in there. Nibbling on the flower's anthers detaches the pollen. Time to pack up her haul. She cleans it off her eyes and antennae with those brushes on her front legs, like windshield wipers. Here it is up close. That leg wipes the pollen right off her eye. Then she moves the pollen from leg to leg, like a conveyor belt. Front to middle to back. The bee does this super fast while she flies from bloom to bloom, moving the pollen into special baskets on her back legs called corbiculae. She bends her leg, using it to squish the pollen into a ball, packing it together with a little saliva and nectar. She can get as many as 160,000 pollen grains into each ball. She's hauling as much as 1/3 of her weight. Back at the hive, meal prep is about to start. But the pollen isn't for making honey. The honey under this wax is made from nectar. They eat it for its sugar. Bees turn pollen into something completely different: bee bread. That's their source of protein. Step 1. Find an open spot. Step 2. Deposit your goods and pack them neatly. Step 3. Let the pollen marinate with a hint of honey. And voila, it's ready. The pantry is stocked, both for adult bees and the babies that are growing in the cells next door. The adults pop in to drop off a special bee bread snack. A little home cooking for the hive's future hard-working flyers.
So after this video, what do you think the two primary purposes of a honeybee are? Now, there are some significant purposes that honeybees have, and there's two that come to the top of my mind when I think about a honeybee. And the first one that you probably think of is that they provide honey, clearly, right? And we all love honey, and we need honey. And then the next one is that they pollinate. This is the most significant. They pollinate 2/3 of the world's crops that we eat. If it wasn't for honeybees, we wouldn't have a lot of the food that we enjoy today. So the honeybee has a pretty significant purpose in pollinating each of these flowers that grow on the ends of these plants that we need for food. And so much care should be taken to make sure that we preserve the population of honeybees throughout the world. What ways have you been blessed by invertebrates? We've talked a little bit about them today. You know, we think about the foods that we eat. You probably have had shrimp at some point in your life, and we love these kinds of foods, right? And you've probably eaten vegetables and fruits, and those are all tied to these invertebrate animals. Thankfully, we have them. Some aerate soil, like we talked about, like worms do. Even some worms provide silk. Like honeybees, there are actually thousands of insects that pollinate flowers that become the fruits and vegetables that we eat. There are shells and sand dollars and starfish that are just super fun to hunt for on beaches. And that could be a purpose, right? Just to provide us with something fun to do or fun to see. That's a purpose in and of itself. You might say, well, that's not a very significant purpose. And I would say to you that you're right. But I would also say that our purposes are unique, right? Think about us and our purposes. We are the same way. My purpose is not the same as my neighbor's purpose and my brother's purpose and my dad's purpose, and yours is unique as well. And these are all unique, and some might be more significant than others. But nonetheless, they're all important to our Heavenly Father, and you're all important. Your purposes are all very important to your Heavenly Father. Some invertebrates are really tasty, like shrimp and crab and lobsters. Some are just really incredibly beautiful, like the coral and sponges and anemones that we looked at today. All of God's creations have a purpose, even if we don't know what it is. And therein kind of lies an important principle too, that sometimes we don't know what the purpose is for every creation. And we don't know our complete purpose either, but we do know that we have a divine purpose. And if we have eyes to see and ears to hear, like it says in the scriptures, then we're going to learn in this life, right? Little by little throughout our lives, we're going to learn what our purpose is, and we'll have little insights throughout our lives that tell us and remind us of what our purpose is, the purpose that we perhaps accepted before we came to earth. One of the things I love about back when President Nelson issued that 5 challenges to youth, you remember these 5 challenges that he issued to you youth a couple of years ago? Then Sister Nelson wrote something about that, and she said one of her hopes was that the youth would complete these challenges and that they would in doing it, that they would find and fulfill their divine mission. And that kind of stuck out to me, that they would find and fulfill their unique mission. And that's a great summary for this lesson, that we all find and fulfill our divine mission and our divine purpose. That's not the case with invertebrate animals. They have a purpose and they fulfill that purpose, and they don't really get to choose much. They don't have the agency like we do, but we get this great opportunity to find it. We get to search for it. We get to pray for it. We get to fast over it. We get to go to the temple and think and meditate and be prayerful about that. And then Heavenly Father can open our eyes, right? And He can open our ears and our opportunities and put people in our path so that we can find and fulfill our divine mission, and recognize that all of God's creations do have this divine mission. Even the tiniest of invertebrates have a divine mission. Well, that's it for this lesson today. Hope you enjoyed that, and we're going to move on next lesson to another invertebrate lesson. I'm excited to share that with you, and hope you have a wonderful day.